everyone. My name is William Del Pilar. Some of you know me as a fantasy sports pioneer who helped commercialize the industry, not the internet, the industry. And you probably found me because of Sports Grumbling. My passion is politics, thus the podcast Fired Up. But I am not the expert in all things. So I want to bring on the expert in the jungle primary that took place. And no, people, that is not a racist term. Get off your high horse. It's a term that was given to our primary system. But without further ado, let me introduce my sidekick here, Ms. Karen Roseberry. Karen's been on here a few times. What you need to know and understand about Karen, she's an activist. She's feminine. She's an activist. She's a feminist, but in a good way. And she's what you would call a strong conservative woman who holds her own, speaks her mind, and is extremely knowledgeable. And the obvious, she's an activist. Karen, welcome again. And we just spoke a few nights ago, and we're back at it. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you, William. I appreciate the opportunity to come back on Fired Up. I don't know that the California was completely fired up during the election, but there was at least an election that took place and there were some votes that were cast. So it's a nice chance to come back and sort of do a little autopsy on what we had talked about before the primary race and kind of jump in to dissect a few of the things that have transpired and have come out of this race to also give us a glimmer of what we can expect in the next few months and in the general election in November.
Karen, are you like me? Come the week of, but usually the day of, I don't want to say inundated, but I get a dozen emails or phone calls. Hey, who do you like here? Who is this guy? What about this race? I've never heard of this. That. And I don't mind doing it. Obviously, it's good for the ego. That's just human nature. But in the back of my head, there's this little voice. Look, man, you should know this. But in their defense, that's what I had to do myself over the last few days. As I told you off camera, I haven't really been paying a lot to the races. And there was one local race I left blank because it's an uber important race. When it determines. But I've come to the belief now, if you don't earn my vote, and the Republican candidate, the only reason he got endorsed was because he was the only Republican candidate. He's actually a swamp creature, an establishment. He tells us he supports gun rights, but then uses GRVOs, which is a tactic used to take guns, you know? And the other one spoke all the right things, but is a Democrat and agreed with one of the uber leftists in our state, Juan Vargas, about policy. So I'm just leaving it blank. And ironically, it's obviously the sheriff's race down here in San Diego, but it's the second cycle I left it blank because there's no way I would vote for the Ruby Ridge murderer in our former sheriff. He was a guy, Bill Gore. And rumor is that well, not rumor, a lot of people say he's one who gave the word to fire on the woman and her child at Ruby Ridge. I don't know if you're aware of that, but it's a big deal over here, you know. And his opponent and the two opponents were just terrible. So sometimes we get bad candidates. And my take since 2012, since Mitt Romney, is I do not vote for an R simply because it's an R, because I truly believe the reason California is in this mess is because we've gone, well, that R is better than the damn. And the reality is, the R's, when you do that, all you're doing is encouraging more of the same. And I think that's why we're in the Biden regime. It's because of that. And I think it's because the state of California is in the state it is. But all this is cyclical. This isn't like the first time it just happens. Any thoughts, any overall thoughts on this election cycle for the jungle primary you want to let the audience know?
Well, I do think that we saw pretty much what we had kind of expected going in, at least right before the election. There were maybe a couple of things that were hoped for that didn't quite go the way that were anticipated. But I mean, first and foremost was the fact that voter turnout remained incredibly depressed and very low. I think that, we're going to see this come in probably under 30, in terms of voter turnout once all of the ballots are cast. I think I was still seeing 19% up until actually primary day. So obviously, there's still those final ballots that are in the mail that are going to be delivered. There's the folks who did go in to vote in person, though that seemed to be a little lower than maybe even was expected as well. So I think that, the turnout certainly is different than what we've seen in several of the last races. And so, the results that come from that, I think that, the congressional candidates in California that, were expected to advance, especially on the Republican side, primarily and largely did so. The Garcia race actually turned out to be pretty strong in his favor. And I think that that's going to bode well for him going forward. And
that's a congressional race, correct?
Right. These are the congressional races. So, Young Kim advances, Michelle Steele advances, kind of all of those that we kind of figured, would. A couple of them, maybe had a little bit more contested of a primary, but overall, we see the advance and the march forward for those congressional seats being kind of the focus for what we're going to be seeing. As we sort of jump into some of the more specific races that we had discussed previously, I might go a little out of order than what we initially discussed, but I do think that if we look at that AG race, for starters, when we last talked, we were kind of thinking that maybe Schubert could sort of slide down the middle of the split between Hotchman and Early. And we also talked, though, that there was a little after we spoke, a Berkeley poll that came out that suggested that split probably was not going to happen. And that Berkeley poll seemed to be pretty much dead on. So we are still seeing a few votes get counted, and it's still fairly close between Hotchman and Early. But right now, Hotchman seems to be edging out, and that's about the only state race.
What race is that?
That's for the Attorney General. So that's Nathan Hotchman, Eric Early, and Anne-Marie Schubert were the contenders that we had previously discussed, and how that played out. So I know Eric Early is still hoping for a last surge of the very conservative Republicans that may have favored him. Hotchman was cautious, but basically issued a statement that suggested that he was the one that was going to advance against Bonta. And it's pretty much the only state race that I see there being a lot of talk about, despite the fact that Laney Chan actually did very, very well in the controller's race.
Yes.
And so, there will be more talk about him going forward in this. But the public safety narrative that came from the Attorney General's race is a wave that is still trying to be ridden as we go into November for the congressional candidates. And it was a nice piggyback on one of the other races that we discussed, and that was the recall up in San Francisco for Chesa Boudin, which succeeded with a 60% over 40%.
Right.
So that was a very strong showing for the kind of the law and order and a public safety, or at least a change away from Boudin's tactics and Boudin's just hyper partisan, what he calls reforms, but in reality is just a lack of prosecution of crime.
All right, Karen, I'm a data guy. I'm not unprepared, but I don't have these notes in front of me. But I've always been a political junkie, and I always look at the numbers, especially since 2015 when I got heavily involved. And I got to be honest, every cycle, right around 30, 35%, anything above that was seen as high turnout. I think with the ballot harvesting, we assume we're going to get the same thing, but I think Democrats are smart. These are primaries. They don't really need to work their schemes until the general, when it all finally counts for those final results. So I agree with you. I think we're going to see about 30, 35%. But in the past, that was the normal number. But I do agree that it's apathetic for the simple reason, everything that's happening in this country, even at the national level, affecting California, Chesa Boudin, the lack of law and order. I would have thought, just naturally based off that, the school shootings, guns, I thought all of that would have driven all this up into, we're looking at a primary with about 40 to 50%. So it is apathetic, I'm agreeing, but I think some of these analysts around the country who talk 80%, I'm like, what races have you been looking at except for the 2020 elections? Meaning you're putting what could possibly become an outlier as the norm, but that's what politicians do.
Well, the recall race was at about 62%. And that was the last race where we had everyone getting a vote by mail ballot. And really, this particular race is aligning much closer to the 2014 gubernatorial primary race that was one of the lowest actually in the state. So if it comes in at 24%, then that is kind of a historic low turnout. Admittedly, I agree that the 2020, presidential November election was one of the highest turnouts and may in fact exactly turn out to be that outlier. We certainly do not usually see elections in the 75 percent range. That is certainly high, but presidential elections and even some of the generals in a gubernatorial year can definitely be in the 60s. A primary race, though, is usually does have that depressed turnout. Again, usually not quite in the 20s, which is where this looks to be headed. Usually more so that 35 ish percent margin, possibly even 40s. So I do think that this is a low turnout even for a primary, but agreed that it shouldn't be being compared to the November 2020 election or even the November 2016 presidential elections.
All right, perfect. Let's get to Chesa Boudin. And you kind of touched on him. I expected a close race. This was not a conservative movement or Republican movement to recall him. They were not leading the charge. This was led by a former supporter of his. As I told you off camera, you can bleep on somebody over and over, but eventually that person's just going to get tired. And it didn't, some people will sit there and say, well, yeah, this has been going on since 2019. Of course you're tired. I thought it would take longer. I thought we're looking at 5-10 years. But the crime wave that literally happened overnight, I think sent him home. And I think what also hurt him to get to that 60% number is the fact once these crimes hit these high-end jewelry stores, once they hit the rich person's hangouts, I think that even created more disparity in the voter. But I was expecting a closer race. The final question I want to ask you about is, in looking at the data, or rather hearing it being talked about, a lot of his keep him in office votes, along with his original run, were by a lot of rich white folks or well-off upper middle income folks. It was literally dominant in those areas. But this go around, he lacked the working class vote. What do you think of that analysis and your overall thoughts?
I think that it was a little bit more than that. I think honestly, it was much more a split within the Democratic Party. I think that you saw when London Breed, was willing to at least, throw some shots his way at the fact that his management of the district attorney's office was just not effective. When you had kind of those mainstream Democrats, coming out and questioning and not backing his plays and certainly not happy with his leadership, and the fact that you saw the rises in crime, you saw, just the continued drug use that's there, and just so many occasions, time and time again, of public safety getting worse and worse in San Francisco, and really even in those neighborhoods where maybe it's not the utmost elite. I'm not familiar with the data that you're suggesting, and I don't know that we have the breakdown yet of the votes that came for this particular race with the 60-40 split. I don't dispute it, I don't doubt it, but I do think that he lost a lot of his base. How wealthy and what the socioeconomic status was of that, I'm not sure, but it's San Francisco, so that's going to be a little higher, and we have to think about who was actually voting in this primary. San Francisco did see a little bit of an uptick, so this recall, I think, actually did drive a few more people out than we saw across the state.
A good rule that any third world country survivor or somebody who's lived in a third world country for many years will tell you is these type of elections, those who aren't affected by the policies will stick with their guy. And those people in gated communities in their ivory towers, they likely stuck by their guy. I agree with you. We don't know until the breakdown happens, but he lost the votes that wanted the unicorn utopia in there where they live at, and it just got progressively worse, to use their term. That's my personal belief, but I believe history will prove me right on that one. All right. Does Chesa Boudin come back from this, or do you think that era is coming to an end of the George Soros, let the criminals kill innocents and I will find a reason to let the criminal go era end?
Well, the progressives certainly want to argue that it was an anomaly,
Yeah.
that it actually had much more to do with his management style than necessarily a referendum on public safety, and certainly less of a referendum on the reform that they deem and claim is necessary within the justice system or the legal system, depending on who you're speaking to or about. I think that there are some interesting aspects to that. So Todd Spitzer down in Orange County won his race resoundingly well with a fairly, easy victory, and against sort of that model of the Boudin Gascon mold.
Right, right.
Whereas
But Karen, is it true that most recalls really fail? That Bodine being ousted is actually more of an exception than the norm, right?
generally speaking, recalls do fail. So yes, the
So
fact that
the,
he actually was successfully recalled is indicative of evidence that he was just needing to go for so many reasons. Whether this is going to start a wave of successful recalls, that remains to be seen. We don't have the data, but this at this point it is anecdotal because it's one successful recall.
I'm chuckling because we don't have the data for the Gascon recall, and I tweeted out the Fox News. Actually, I only have a few thousand followers, but you hit that dot, then their thing is like, where are you? Have y'all actually seen any data? Do y'all know how many signatures are actually needed versus the time allotted to get them? Has anybody done any investigative reporting on your end? Because it seems to me all you are getting is what the a group is telling you, and obviously it was much shorter than that. But at the end of the day, people are just assuming that the signatures are there based off that group coming out and stating they were on track. And I think that, first of all, that's terrible PR, because you don't want the masses to think, oh, they're set with signatures, because that makes it harder to get more signatures. What's your take? Do you think this? One before I get to the question, I follow what you're saying about management and all that, but the truth of the matter is the voters have no clue about management style, the people there, things of that nature. They're just voting on what they see happening on the streets. So I don't think I buy the leftist excuse for that. But am I wrong? Is there any reality? I don't see the connection. But if there is one, how does it connect it to him and to the average voter going, I don't like his management, I'm not voting for him?
Right. I don't necessarily know for sure that it's going to be the average voter per se, but I think that it drives the narrative and the discussion. So who's out there saying that Boudin is problematic? Well, much like kind of like with Gascon to a degree, and to kind of answer that question also, you're hearing a lot of these things coming out of the district attorney's offices. And so from the offices where this management is taking place, from the other electeds that have to interact with his office, have to work with him, whether it's the sheriff, whether it's the city attorney, whether it's city council members that are getting blowback on this. They're the ones that could be talking about the if you will, that management component that drove those individuals to tell constituents that there's a crime problem, and getting them to think about it and see it in the light of why they want to recall him for their own personal reasons. So it's kind of who starts the process off and why.
I get that, but honestly, I think what it boiled down to was going on social media, Facebook, Twitter, wherever, and just seeing video after video after video. I buy what you're saying, but the percentage of those people I would sit there and classify as negligible, because it's small, but I don't know. I'm just guessing.
I'm not quite sure that we're saying the same thing. I'm saying that the person it's like starting a game of telephone. And by the time the message gets to the voter, it might even be a little different than what was actually started. But what started the game of telephone was the fact that Boudin was failing in both administratively and prosecutorially. And prosecutorially has much more of the kind of sexy ring for the average voter. But what started it off and what got the money going for it had to do with those who were not happy with perhaps his management style. That's what I think was being communicated as to why Boudin was recalled by the left, whereas the right is certainly going to say no. To get a 60% majority, maybe that's what started it, but that's not what finished it. And I think that's what you're saying. I think that it doesn't matter what started the recall off. What finished it was the fact that 60% of the electorate became frustrated by his lack of prosecution. And so I think so. I think
properly too. It was the electorate, because my analysis isn't because I'm a conservative and I wanted to be like that. My analysis is based off of human nature, how it flowed. I think you hit on the head. They may have started like that, but then once the videos flowed, once the crime, once the person was mugged, beaten, taken to the hospital, told they had to pay it all 100%. I'm obviously being facetious, but I think all that's what kind of sealed it. And I said one final comment, but I lied. What do you think of the irony of his campaign being a George Soros funded multi-billionaire campaign, and then him accusing right-wing billionaires of destroying them? And his accusation was based more along the lines of class warfare. See, it was the rich billionaires who don't like what I'm trying to do to help you doing it. The irony being his campaign was funded by a billionaire.
I'm not quite sure if that was a question or if it was just a statement.
It's a statement in the sense, what do you think of that story that he's trying to spin?
Well, I think that he was caught in a lie on that, because the reality is that this is San Francisco, that the numbers don't even match up for that. So again, tracing the money, that's a little different than tracing the votes. But the reality is that yes, there is certainly a hypocriticalness to, and a hypocrisy to, who's funding whom, but the reality is that Republicans weren't the ones that elected him, nor were they the ones that recalled him, because it's San Francisco, and just the percentage alone of Republicans in that county is minimal. So
right. And the final caveat is a Latino. I grew up in a world where police corruption is everywhere, and I think that's why most Latinos have started fleeing the Democrat Party, because we come here to this country, are born or raised with the values of law and order, and that's all we want. Meaning we want a safe space with those who can protect it and create the safe space, i.e. the community, law and order. And I think at our core as humans, that's what we all want. I've said Latinos, but what I'm talking about, people who come from these countries and dictatorships, Certainly
the Asian hate component was definitely a factor. And we even see that, in Los Angeles with hate crimes there, and the fact that there is not necessarily the prosecution that needs to be taking place for them. Real quick, just to answer your other question about your tweet on that Fox post as it relates to the other Soros-funded DA Gascon. Like I say, I think it's going to come down to verification rate right now, and that's what we're not hearing a lot talked about. There's about 27 days left, and it's really going to come down to the number of verified signatures.
It's going to be what's the word? It's just going to be I don't know the word, but it's if they don't get the signatures, that's catastrophic to our side. And again, that to me, this is me, not Karen. That to me is the incompetence of the Republican Party, the CAGOP. And I'll leave it at that. We got a lot of other reasons.
The CAGOP is really not involved terribly. Although today actually there was one connection that was made with Jessica Malone Patterson coming out, connecting the Hodgman AG race a bit to the Gascon recall, so ever so slightly. But
well, let's get into that race. Let's get into it. That's an Attorney General's race. I will be honest. I'm so disgusted with the Republican Party and my little group on Facebook that I run. Eric Early was the only guy who was actually promoting. So, and I don't watch the videos, but before I post them on, I watch a few minutes. And I didn't vote for him because I liked him. I'm like, he was the only one to me that was getting out there to the people. And this is the primary. So I don't mind throwing a little wrench, making things a little exciting. Sue me, call me any names. I know when and who I want to vote for. My vote has to be earned. And I guess what I'm trying to say is none of the other candidates even attempted to earn my vote. I didn't hear from them. I'm sure they sent mailers, but to me, that's the most useless way to communicate. So if you're, so I gave Eric Early my vote. Now, most people are going to disagree with that, and I'm not going to argue because I didn't give him my vote per policies or anything. I'm like, it's a primaries. I don't like how the CAGOP is running things. I'm going to give the Grassroots Conservative my vote. Now you can tell me how dumb that was. But what you were telling me is it's a race right now.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a race, and well, I won't
Numbers.
call it that dumb. I will say that it does play potentially into what the Bonta narrative was trying to be. You know, there basically when we last talked, we talked about the fact that there was actually an independent expenditure, an IE, that was funded by Bonta's supporters. So the current incumbent, the Democrat incumbent Attorney General Rob Bonta, has supporters who were funding a PAC and an independent expenditure to push Eric Early as his opponent. The idea being, and this is what we saw in the recall election with Newsom. We even saw it with Newsom a little bit in, if you will, choosing his opponent now for the gubernatorial race, is this attempt to marginalize and this attempt to polarize and divide the partisanship even in a far greater capacity than is already present. And so the suggestion is that Early's the most extreme candidate. The suggestion is that Dolly's the most extreme candidate. The suggestion is they want to run against the candidate that they can paint, if you will, in the worst light possible, whether
Absolutely
accurate
correct.
or not. And they're
Absolutely
going to
correct.
do that with any candidate. And I think we spoke a little bit about this. I mean, they did it with Mitt Romney, for crying out loud. Okay, they had him, painted into, just this horrible picture. Yet now, he's, the sane and rational, Republican that they can sometimes, sway. So they certainly are fickle in their definitions for what's going on based off of what suits their agenda at the time.
Yeah,
But
you're
as it,
right. You're right. The fundamentalist vote is like the hardcore leftist vote, meaning their issues they're not gonna move from. They're not gonna compromise. It's what they want, and there's just not enough of those people in the state of California or across the nation for the most part. You got to go to places like Alabama where that dominates. And I'm not knocking fundamentalists. My mother's a fundamentalist. My sisters are fundamentalists. I'm not, but I understand that world. I understand those beliefs, and I respect those people, just as I respect a leftist who is passionately believes in their beliefs. I just have issues when they want to rule us and not compromise. So that's why I believe Bonta wanted Eric Early. But at the end of the day, again, I'm speaking for myself, but part of the problem is the GOP, the CAGOP abandoning certain candidates like that instead of going in and fighting for that. And I first saw that with Bill Simon decades ago. The powers that be didn't want him because he was an odd duck. He just seemed odd.
he was a good guy, though. I would agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah, super rich guy though. I think self-made entrepreneur from a family or something like that. But that's when I first saw it. So Eric Early, what I'm trying to say is, well, I said all this about the fundamentals and hoping they can compromise a little because there's more than one way to skin a cat. I shouldn't have said it that way, the way the world's politically correct. But it also falls on the CAGOP abandoning the people who win the primary because they don't see exactly eye to eye. And that's one reason I truly believe this state is so deep blue. The red wave is going to happen across literally almost every state in America but California. And I don't count the congressional races as part of that, the red wave here. I'm talking statewide, locally. All right. So tell me then, you said that about Eric Early. Was that the outcome that was predicted, or was the CAGOP a little shocked? And after it's all said and done with all the ballots remaining and all that, can Eric Early pull out the upset and get in the top two? I don't know the numbers. So
okay, so Bonta definitely has the number one spots utterly secured. Right now, Nathan Hochman is edging out Eric Early by about, I think it was last time I looked, I think it was about 2.5 percentage points. Ooh. So it really kind of depends on which ballots are still to come in. If the remaining ballots, and again, this is a statewide race. So I heard, for example, in Los Angeles County, that all of the day of votes actually ended up being cast. Most of your day of votes are probably conservative, the tendency to want to vote in person on election day, et cetera. So there's a pretty good likelihood that in LA County, the more conservative ones probably were cast. However, the mail-in ballots that came I think I also heard a spec that basically said about half the mail-in ballots that came prior to Tuesday. So if people held on to their ballot and didn't drop it in until Tuesday, obviously that hasn't been counted either. Anything that they had received prior to Tuesday, about half of those have been counted. So the general sense right now is that it seems as though Democrats have actually been getting their ballots in earlier. Republicans have been holding on to theirs a little bit later. So Early is certainly hoping that there's going to be a swell of that more conservative Republican vote to push him over the top. Hodgman right now currently leading, Hodgman having issued a statement basically saying that he sees himself cautiously advancing into the top two. So the CAGOP issued a statement almost right on the heels of that, talking about public safety, law and order, and the kind of support that they're mustering for Hodgman.
Gotcha. You don't have to answer because everyone has a right to vote in private or whatever the law says or whatever, But did you have somebody you liked in here in that race?
I actually did like Schubert. Mostly I liked Anne Marie Schubert because I really do think she would have been the most competitive against Bonta. Now I think we're going to be looking at a very partisan race, and I think that we'll see it follow along the same split that we're going to see every other seat in California, with maybe the exception of controller. I think had there been maybe just a little bit more of a mix-up where there aren't just straight Republican, straight Democrat partisan seats, would have gotten people to pause maybe at least a little more slightly when they get to the controller race. But now with there not even being a no party preference voter advancing, most likely, again, your partisan label and partisan description is still pretty much the number one indicator for how people have a tendency to vote.
I want to move on, but you mentioned Schubert, and the reason I don't want to move on is because we did talk about her a bit last cycle. She is the MPP. You were convinced she could get the job done. I think, not that I'm pitting you, you weren't convinced she could win, but you're like, she's got more support than we may think, et cetera, et cetera. You're like, this is what I always say. The underlining pinnings that we don't really see on the surface may have been there for her. Because that's what I've been saying.
Just to be clear on what I was saying that if she could advance to the number 2 position, or if she could advance to the general election, I think that she would have been able to give Bonta a race that we aren't necessarily going to see with the partisanship.
Right.
The question of how much support she ever had going in, we discussed the strategy that was there and whether or not it was going to be effective. And really, in regards to that, what happened is that the campaign and they needed to split the Democrats more than they did. And that was the problem. There was a monolith of Democratic support for Bonta, and they weren't able to drive a wedge between the liberal left and that more moderate Democratic support. The individuals in San Francisco who voted recall for Boudin should have been the exact same model and mold that Schubert was looking to pull over into her column, and that was not successfully delivered.
I agree. I think my take is that these MPPs are outliers. Steve Poizner will go down in history as one of the greatest wins as an independent when he won it that year, because they're outliers. And the reason I say that isn't to pound on you to say I was right, is the party machines, how strong they are, and not necessarily in money they get or what they push out to us, but in how the constituents. There's too many constituents, and I've seen this firsthand with a lot of my wife's clients. My wife's a cosmetologist, 10 zillion clients I've met over the last 20 years, and they're great when I start asking questions or I'll give her something. I want this answered because she's very diverse in her clientele, and most of them, they just vote their party ticket, and I think that's what we saw here, because on paper, Schubert sounds like everything you said, but she only got 8% of that vote.
To be clear, Poizner advanced in the year that he did as an MPP because there was no Republican that ran against him.
Right, but it doesn't matter.
When he won, I think he had a partisan label, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. But at the end of the day, he advanced. Because each scenario is different. It's like a Super Bowl game. If the opposing team doesn't have their star quarterback, 20 years later is when they start talking about that. Only the hardcore are going to remember that. Most people are like, man, Tom Brady got his 20th ring. That's what they remember. So perception versus reality rules the day. And that actually goes with what I'm saying. I think the Poizner victory was given a little bit of a more oomph than probably should have been to some MPPs this go around. I'm not saying I'm right, but what I'm saying is that was a factor that may have attributed to certain hope with MPPs this go round. But all that said, I guess I don't blame it, because we've been so disappointed in various ways with our own party, including Democrats with theirs, that we're starting to look at MPPs with hope. Do you think Schubert has a career after these primaries?
I think that there's probably still a niche for her. I mean, she's not running for district attorney because she was running for attorney general. So the Sacramento district attorney race is very different than, what it would be if she was involved in that race. I don't know what her plan is now for, where she will go from here. Will she run for another office? No idea.
Yeah, I can see her probably wanting to rebuild, get back into that local office, and then check out where she stands. Can the Republican Party unite? Because they rarely have in this state when conservatives and establishment go to battle, and you see it in the votes. The apathy, the turnout. That's why I don't vote Republican. I vote conservatives, and it's a direct result of the CAGOP and combined with some national politics. But that said, can the Republican Party and conservatives come together if it's early, who wins it, or if it's hot? I guess what I'm asking is, whoever the winner is, can the other side come together?
It won't matter, because I mean, even if you get all of the Republicans to turn out in support of the candidate, it's a 60-40 split. That's the problem with the partisanship of the statewide candidates, and it's the reason why CAGOP is relatively checked out of those statewide races and is focusing on the congressional seats.
Yeah. I got a text from a newspaper reporter yesterday. Who do you like in the governor's race? And I texted back, does it matter who I like if it's not Newsom? I mean, who's going to even compete with him? And real quick on the governor's race, no surprise, Newsom ran away with it. The CAGOP is probably not going to put a lot of money into Daw, not because they don't like Daw, because it's a non-competitive race. I'm assuming you're going to agree, because that's kind of what you just said, right?
The CAGOP is definitely going to focus on the congressional seats. They also have a little bit of another problem that's happened because of the jungle primary in a couple of different ways. The jungle primary caused for the loss of a Senate seat as a result of this, or at least it sure looks that way. Senate District 4, a hardcore red Republican district, is going to most likely, unless there's some sort of radical change, but it would be pretty significant at this point, going to end up being a Dem-on-Dem race, because there were 2 Democrats that ran and 5 Republicans. So even though you have a conservative enough districts to have elected a Republican senator from District 4, there's not going to be a Republican on the general election because of that jungle primary, and because of, again, the inability for Republicans to work and play well with each other and figure out that 5 Republicans versus 2 Democrats, even in a district where they have what would have been a majority, isn't going to allow them to advance when the primary turnout was so low, and it didn't flood with enough Republicans to advance at least one to go forward.
Yeah. That happened here in an assembly race AD 66 or 76, where Pete Wilson's son lost the race, and there were shenanigans there. There was a fake woman said he did something to her at a bar like a week or two, and it kind of tilted it. It turned out to be false, and she's what do they call it, perpetual liar, so we lost that. But again, I got involved in 2015. For people out there, if you want to get involved, it's not hard to get involved and get into the heart of the party. You meet all the players, etc., etc. And this is a scenario I see playing 70% of the time. Too many people in one race. The Republican Party goes to the conservatives, dictates them, get the bleep out. They don't offer nothing. They don't sit there and say, we'll groom you, or you work with you, or nothing. Get the bleep out. So what's that do? Oh, go bleep yourself. And it creates that scenario. Now, I'm not saying that's every time, but that has a lot to do with it, the arrogance of party leaders. So I look at that loss, and that's on the CAGOP, because it's their responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen. And sometimes I admit it's going to be no one's fault because you have stubborn candidates. But again, as a third worlder, as an American citizen, seeing a dictatorship, I'm like, well, that's that candidate's right, and I'm not going to take it away from him. I may not like it, but I'm not going to denigrate him, et cetera, et cetera. So I get passionate about that.
No, I'm not disputing what you're saying. I actually would hope that it wouldn't necessarily be, if you will, party leaders that are going to dictate this, or that are even necessarily, I mean, maybe try to mediate it a little bit, at least get the candidates in a room together and see if there can't be some reasonableness amongst themselves to hash it out. Have at least an analyst show them the math of, there's this many Republicans, this is the turnout that's going to be likely in this scenario. Divide that by what you presume your vote share is going to be, and show them that they essentially are going to be defeating what they claim is their own cause. Then you still have an ego issue, and that may be a bigger factor. But again, I don't think it should be party, leaders that are the shot callers. But I do think that you have candidates that either don't recognize the severe reality of their actions, or they aren't aware enough of the reality of the district as it relates to the results that are going to come out of it.
Right. I have a simple belief. It's a teacher's job to teach. It's a student's job to learn. The responsibility is incumbent on a student to do his homework, study, etc. But at the end of the day, it's a teacher's job to teach that kid. On a ship, it's a commander's responsibility no matter what happens. In this situation, it is a Republican Party's responsibility. How they do it, based off what you just said, hey, I'm all for that. Whatever works. Bring in an analyst, do this. But here in San Diego, they do none of that. They do that.
And we saw again in the BOE race, so the Board of Equalization race, District 4, again, a district that could have potentially gone Republican. I mean, it would still be a fight, but too many Republicans ran. And right now in BOE District 4, it looks like you're going to have another Dem on Dem race. And so again, those slivers of opportunities that Republicans or conservatives have even to advance to the general, that jungle primary that we discussed, especially in our last, segment in our last show, just really has taken kind of a brutal hit on a couple of seats. That there was even kind of a question as to whether or not the Assembly District 34 is going to go R on R. It's a super Republican district. And it's actually being kind of fought over by two of the Republican Assembly members, two of the rare Republican Assembly members that we actually have, Tom Lackey and
is it Tom Lackey? I mean, he's
Tom
a big
Lackey.
name. He's a big name in California. Or
and Smitty Smith. Well, yeah, he's a first-term Assembly member. So the thought initially going in was that it was going to be an R on R race because it was so Republican. It looks like it might eke out that way. It's super close between them now. Depending on what happens, actually are tied in percentage points, and they're tied for first and second. But the Democratic opponent is very close to taking over one of those two spots. As of last night, that actually changed this morning. Last night, it was going to be a Republican and a Democrat that was going to advance. We weren't absolutely certain which Republican, but it's going back now and looking like we'll probably see an R on R race in 34.
That happened here in my district for congressional with Isa and about 3 or 4 other Republicans, and Campo Nijar, one came in first in the primary, but we're so red at the end of the day. It's changed now. It's not as red as it used to be, but we had 2 heavyweights and they advanced easily. Marie Waldron getting about 60%, Randy Vogel getting about 40%. And as I've said, I've chosen a side, and I'm going to hold that back until I see if they want to work with me. Because I believe it or not, they view me as a community leader out here. Can you imagine that? I remember the first time I got a phone call from a bigwig, and I'm thinking, why are you calling me? And then they wanted me to do this, this, and this. And then I go, well, don't you have people there who already do that? And this is when I started to get angry at the Republican Party. Well, we do. They're assigned. We got central committees, but they don't do their jobs. And I mean, he was just being purely honest, and thank you for him. And I just held my tongue because he was just relaying the message. Actually, he was the big wheel, so I wasn't gonna, piss him off. But I just got angry. I'm like, that's why we lose. People want to get elected, like central committees, or they want to watch it. Then they don't want to do the actual work. They just want to go socialize at the GOP monthly meetings, at the fairs, events where they come in. Yeah, I'm doing this. In reality, they haven't lifted a darn finger. All right. So the controller race. Talk to us. First of all, again, for the audience, what is a controller and who are the main players here and how's it looking?
So the controller is essentially kind of the chief financial officer, if you will, of the state of California. They are the ones that sign the checks. If you get your, check back for a income tax refund for the state, things of that nature, they also sign the checks going out, as well. So they are kind of that fiscal check and stop on much of what transpires in the enormous California state budget.
Gotcha.
I actually didn't actually see the second person to advance. So if you have it there, you may need to go ahead and mention it because the candidate that I'd been watching and that had been most specific, I think it was Malia, if I'm not mistaken, but don't hold me to that as the other candidate to go into the top two.
Correct.
But
Malia
Lady Chen
Cohen.
is right. But Lady Chen is really the big, kind of talking point that has certainly come out of this as the Republican to advance. And I think actually even take the number one spot in that. Again, picked up the LA Times endorsement. There's been talk of the fact that there should be, some kind of a check on just a state system that is just radically and super majority Democratic that, the Democrat Party has that hold on, that having at least one state officer, one constitutional state officer that is not of the majority party could at least serve as some type of check on that supermajority.
Right. Here's my issue with that race. I just talked about the congressional race here with ISA. There were 3 other major Republicans in terms of known name brands here, and they split the vote, but still ISA went on and he shellacked him, but it was the second time running against him. So that was, statistically speaking, that was the norm. But it's exact same situation here, though, in a way, because Chen was the only Republican. And what makes this race fascinating that our audience may not realize is that Chen won. I mean, you don't really win the primary, you advance, but he won by a lopsided number. Usually the lopsided winner is a Democrat with the Republican that advanced at a 60-40, 70-30. Where, as you say, we know what's going to happen. But in this race, it was Chen, the Republican, who came in number 1 with about 38%, if I'm correct, and Malia Cohen with 21%. But here's the kicker: there's either 3 or 4. I want to say 4 Democrats in that race and 1 Green Party member. But my point is, whether it's 3 or 4, they all split that vote. So to me, I'm hoping for a competitive race, because statistically, that's what I see happening. I see the Democrat vote split, and the Republican challenger's job here is how does he keep it split and take some of those votes his way for well, not necessarily split, but how does he take some of those votes for the general? That's the challenge for Chen, is not for all those votes that went to the other Democrats to go into Chen this fall, because 21%, I don't have in front of me the numbers of the other Democrats, but it's logic dictates you add those numbers up, and that's kind of what you may be looking at. Thoughts?
Right. So I think where the issue is that it is nice when the Republican is able to advance in that number 1 spot. But the reality of what we're actually going to most likely see, unfortunately, is that the Democrats that had, if you will, split the vote amongst the other 4 contenders are eventually going to unite against the 1 Democrat that advances, because the Democratic Party realizes that voting is much more of a team sport than Republicans oftentimes play it. And we're already at a disadvantage with the percentages that we have. So unless Chen is able to really go after those disaffected Democrats, which again is why having like a Schubert having advanced would have been helpful for him in this regard, because then you would have had people looking a little more closely at the candidates, not at the letter of the name after the candidate, with the entire statewide ticket basically being either, D versus R. Pretty much we're going to see that the Democrats that vote vote Democratic, and vote for the Democrat Party, and the Republicans that vote for the Republicans. Yes, no party preference voters, may, actually, be able to be drawn over if they turn out in the general election, which they will almost certainly do at a higher percentage than they did in the primary. And certainly that's going to be a contingency that Chen needs to get, but that's going to be new voters that didn't vote in the primary. Pretty much everyone that voted in the primary will probably unite around one of the two candidates that, were there, even if they weren't the one that they voted for.
The silver lining, again, I mentioned this for Latinos, but Chen's Chinese. And they're to me, most minorities are misinformed. There's a former liberal who bought into the lies, who bought into the shtick. I think not that Republicans are saints. I'm talking about the candidate himself and what he can do. And if he can sit there and get his ground game going, get into those areas, especially the Asians, where they can relate to him through culture, through whatever. And it's an opportunity for him to educate the voter to the financial truth of what's happening with their tax dollars, what's happening with all the money that's been lost. But I think that's very intensive in terms of manpower, in terms of his time. But my belief is simple. If you want to win, you got to do what's necessary to win. And Democrats do that. Our side doesn't. Our side is convinced they can go to the galas, the once a month meetings, and get every Republican. Well, the sad truth is, as you alluded to earlier, you get every Republican out of the vote for you, we're still outnumbered. Any final words on the controller race at the end? Okay, if you want prediction in November, based off your knowledge, your history, and things can change, so I'm not holding you to it. But as of today, who would win that race? In the
controller race?
Yeah.
I mean, most likely it's going to be the Democrat that advanced Malia, based off of everything that we've already just discussed. And unless Chen is able to do something pretty radically different and able to get people to think about that race and able to split off, the Democrats from that, and able to, really pull disaffected Democrats over and or turn out no party preference voters at a rate probably higher than we see in his favor. The statewide demographics, I mean, we've talked about this about 15 times, that they don't vote well for Republican statewide candidates. So
statistically speaking, it's a done deal for the Democrats unless they screw it up, is what I'm hearing, based off past history.
There's a lifetime, before, the November election, but the demographics do not bode well for statewide Republican candidates.
Right. And you're right. They don't. But I think that's because the CAGOP did not do their job. And they can still do their job. And telling me that we have a Latina chair who hasn't lived in a barrio and never lived in a barrio, don't tell me she's our connection to get the Latino vote, because that hasn't happened yet. And then until Latinos
re-register as Republicans, there's no indication whatsoever that they would vote Republican.
Oh, absolutely not true. If they go into those Latino barrios, and they're talking to them, at the end of the day, they may not even know how to unregister as Democrat and register as a Republican. But if we talk to them one-on-one, they can vote. They will vote. But we don't do that. Again, I'm talking anecdotally from a culture sample. I can't speak for the Asian culture. I can't speak for Black America, but I can't speak for Latinos, but I can tell you my direct experiences in those situations. And on the surface, you're right. But that's what I mean by where there's a will, there's a way. It's going to take hard work, but somebody's got to do it. Somebody's got to start it.
I think that the hard work, though, would come from re-registering them rather than trying to talk to them on one-off race after race. It's explaining to them that they do want to look more closely at Republican candidates in general and get them to think outside of that. Because again, the number one driving factor for how an individual votes is their partisan registration.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Right. But Karen, you're talking long-term strategy. That's a goal, is to have more registered Republicans and Democrats. I'm talking a battle. It's like time stops. Here's the battle. What needs to be done for this battle? Not for the long term of what we hope. The battle is to get that vote. And if re-registering them into a Republican happens, great. But I don't care if it's a Democrat entry in that polling booth, like Ronald Reagan didn't care. He just wanted the vote and got the Democrat vote.
Right. But what we're trying to say, though, is that unless you're going to do that for every single race that has a Republican running, that's the only way you would be able to follow that pattern and that model to get them to turn out to vote a slate, if you will, of conservative candidates.
And that's what I'm saying. I'm not concerned with that. I'm pretending I'm Chen. I'm not concerned with that. That's the overall bigger picture battle. I'm concerned with my upcoming race in November and what I, as a candidate, need to do. And there's a very, very distinct difference in that, because you're absolutely right. But that's a long-term battle headed by the CAGOP county party leaders, eventually uniting. Because to go forward with your example one step further, I get angry that there are campaigns that work in the same district and they don't work together for petty reasons or money reasons. And I'm like, well, that's another reason we lose. If we can't work together as a party and double up, say, our volunteers for certain things, we are our own worst enemy. But I'm babbling now, so let's move forward. I'm not babbling as much as I don't want to get off topic because of my passion too much. Let's get
You're fired up. That's okay. That's what this podcast is about. So it's
there
good.
you go. Thank you for bailing me out. Surprises. Any surprises you saw?
I was a little surprised by the percentage turnouts for the mayoral races and the sheriff's race in Los Angeles County. Now, Caruso actually did fairly well. And, you know,
okay, Karen, I apologize. Just for the audience, you need to name some of the major players at least so we know who you're talking about.
Well, I the first one is Caruso. So, you know, he was the mayoral race is technically nonpartisan, though he was a former Republican who now registered as, I think he actually registered as a Democrat, if I'm not mistaken, maybe an MPP. I'd actually have to double check that because, again, it's a no party preference race. He was running against Karen Bass. And so it's Rick Caruso. He's a developer. Pretty much self-funded his race, came in a little late, although people had been talking about him running. When he first jumped in, he was polling at about 6%. But it was pretty quick that was going to be seen to grow. Buscaino, who had been kind of that no party preference front runner, eventually would come out and back Caruso as well. So Caruso does get the number one spot in the win for the advancement for the mayoral seat. He was really hoping for 50% plus one for the amount of money that he dumped into the race. It was like $36 million that he dumped in.
So that
he'll
means
go
he
against
won.
Karen. I want to say he'll go against Karen Bass in November. What surprised me a little bit was just that I don't think he's broken 40 yet. Again, the numbers are still changing and fluctuating. Last I looked, I think he was at 38, 39.
Oh yeah.
So I was kind of thinking that he might get a little closer to that 50 mark. The other race that I thought that was, and then one other contender in that race was Kevin DeLeon, who did stay. And
really, he ran in that race.
He did. He took about 7% of the vote.
For the people out there, DeLeon's a very powerful Democrat in the party, or at least used to be.
Correct. Yeah, he actually used to be an assembly member as well. Then he was an LA City Council member, and then began his run for mayor. Ferrer and Buscaino both dropped. Ferrer backing Bass, not surprisingly, Buscaino backing Caruso. The other race in Los Angeles County that I thought was, again, I don't think I definitely didn't see it as being a lock in the primary election, and that I did see it going on to the November general, but I thought it would go on with a little bit higher of a percentage, was the sheriff's race. So the sheriff's race had, I think, 7 or 8 candidates that were running. And so Alex Villanueva is the incumbent. He does advance. He's advancing with over 30% of the vote. And he'll be going up against Luna. I don't remember his first name right off the top of my head, but is going to be running against Luna, who took the number 2 spot. I kind of thought that we would see Villanueva probably in the 40s as well. Because of the number of opponents that he was going against, I thought 50+1 would be kind of a stretch for him to be able to take it in the primary. Both of those, though, both of the number 1 spots are law and order candidates, but they're law and order candidates that didn't come through at quite as strong of a showing as would be hoped, especially, with some of the other, factors and races and, politics that are going on in Los Angeles County. And that's part of the talk that's come out of whether Boudin is going to be indicative of a change of regime for Gascon as well. Gascon's people are saying, well, Caruso and Villanueva didn't win their races outright. Maybe there's not as much of that sweep for reform in Los Angeles County as we saw in San Francisco, or maybe there's other reasons at play.
Yeah, I got to say this. Think about Kevin DeLeon, very Latino, huh? Yeah, Kevin. Well, who are you? I am Kevin DeLeon. His real name is Kevin Alexander Leon. You have these people in politics today who they're so desperate to be seen as something. So, for example, you look at me, you're not going to know I'm Latino. I've got Asian in me, Latino in me. Our family's going from white to black. So I've never done that. So I look at, because Kevin DeLeon, you look at him, you're like, you assume Latino, or something. But when I see these people change their names and create another paradigm about who they are, I'm like, you're a fraud. You want us to believe one thing and you're not man enough, woman enough to go with who and what you really are. So, I just had to throw that out. That's today's Democrat in California nonstop. I'm sorry, Karen, I had to say that there. But okay, those are some of your surprises. The final question. Any hints at what races are the race to, hold on, let me grab my popcorn. Hold on, let me grab my beer. The type of races that are going to enthrall the state. I'll give you the only thing I see enthralling the state right now are going to be some local R on R or D on D. But the one thing that will have our popcorn in our hand and maybe end up drinking too many beers in sorrow is the Recall Gascon signature count. That's what I'm looking forward to. But in November, what are you looking forward to watching with great enjoyment?
Oh, wow. With great enjoyment. It's really going to come down to those congressional seats, I think. And again, I think that, we really did see the congressional candidates, the Michelle Steele, the Young Kim, Mike Garcia, even David Valadao, who, certainly had probably the closest, margin for his advancement, into the primary. But, these are the candidates that are currently, the incumbents that fought hard for their seats, and took them in 2020 and, want to keep them for 2022. To help, bring that House, back over into, the Republican side of things, and really be able to kind of stand up further to what we're seeing with the Biden administration, with the inflation, with the Ukraine, with, in California, we've got water issues that, Congress can sometimes help with, with some of the things that they're doing. But, we still see a public safety issue that is a nationwide discussion, as well. But really that those, gas prices, the inflation, and the, international instability and insecurity that's also causing and wreaking some havoc with those stock markets and the financial markets that come from that insecurity as well. That those congressional seats really are going to be the races to watch.
Right, and I agree with you. I would have said it from the perspective of how the CAGOP reacts across the board, because there's national politics and there's our state politics. So we know they're all in and fighting for these congressional seats. And I'm sorry, I don't put any weight into the CAGOP as much as the red wave at the congressional level, more PO'd people than the GOP's messaging to convince voters to vote for their candidates. But I am going to see how these candidates use the issues at hand and the interaction of the local county CAGOPs. This is a time for a movement. I don't see any movement happening in California. So I'm concerned about that. And by movement, what I'm talking about is I see the red wave happening when I talk to friends in North Carolina, when I talk to friends in Alabama, in the Maryland, DC district, even though that's probably going to still remain blue. You're seeing this movement, this anger. And I'm not seeing any of that here in California. And then now I'm speaking very generally. I'm sure there's aspects of it happening like we saw with Chesa Boudin. But for the Republicans, that's going to be important to me because my support is really lingering. I've come close a couple of times switching back to independent, but I'm sticking with the Republican Party for selfish reason. It's a machine. It's the closest to my values, and if I want to get involved and make a difference, that's where I have to go. And our own assembly race is going to be one of those R on R battles. So I'm going to see what the Republican Party does. And right now, I am doing an investigative piece on one of the candidates in that race. It's not pretty. It may amount to be absolutely zero. But if I'm right, then something happened. And that's what I'm trying to find out. I actually spoke to a reporter, and the reporter was thinking it's so juicy, like, I'll do it if you don't want to. Just tell me what you, and I was like, no, I'm just trying to gather information because I don't like corruption. I don't like backdoor policies. I don't like the common folk being forced into having to have something because a rich district in our area, or rich suburb, whatever you want to call it, has ties with our elected leader, and they know each other going back decades because of politics. So that's what I'm investigating, and I don't know how it's played out, because it takes cojones to do that, because if I do that, I'm kind of crossing into territory where I make lifelong enemies. So we'll see how that goes, because first, the opposing candidate, I think, has got to be worth it, and two, the issue may turn out to be nothing. I'm going to bring this issue up regardless, but I'm a fair man. If there's nothing and it's just me being angry, I got to learn how to live with that. That's the problem in our society. We choose not to live with that, and then we radicalize everything. You know, that's why Brett Kavanaugh was threatened, because the left
not just threatened. Yeah, I mean, there was an arrest that was made.
Arrest for murder.
Yes,
and that's on the Democrat Party. You know, in 2020, they condoned, supported the maiming, the destruction of property, and the murdering of innocent civilians, and they justified it. They justified all these protests at these SCOTUS's home when the law dictates, no, you don't allow that. You know, I believe they should impeach Merrick Garland if they take the House, not because I don't like him, not because he's a scumbag, not because there's a warm seat waiting for him in hell the day he moves to take his next journey. It's because the proof is there. He ignored his responsibility to protect SCOTUS by allowing those people there, because by law, he's not supposed to do that. And they knew what would happen. They knew this could happen. I personally believe, once again, myself, not Karen speaking, I personally believe the Democrats are okay with the murder of a conservative Supreme Court justice, because what does that allow them to do? Pick their own justice. And I'm not saying that to say it out of hate. I look at what they allow with BLM. I look at how the media defended the shooting at the baseball field. You know, I look at what Maxine Waters said about violence. I look at what Chuck Schumer said about letting the dogs of war. He didn't say that, but it's, in essence, what he's saying, letting the dogs of war out. I look at all that, and I'm like, this is what you want, you know, and it's not right. I don't like Sotomayor. I don't like Breyer or whoever else. I don't like any of those leftists, but by God, that's a system we made, and we need to protect them from these psycho, and I say psycho because remember in the 80s, the psycho fundamentalists wanting to shoot up the abortion clinics. That was a big media thing. It was much smaller than what the media portrayed it. But I'm like, yeah, you arrest those nut jobs.
Well, Secret Service also did an arrest against somebody that was trying to crash the Biden motorcade as well. So you know what? It's kind of equal opportunity arrest of, you know, a Kavanaugh, you know, attempted murder, arrest of somebody crashing trying to get into the motorcade for Biden. Let's just say that I think we are seeing people very ratcheted up emotionally, whether because of just the state of affairs, whether it's the last 2 years, whether it's the economic state of affairs, whether it's the partisanship and just the amount of divisiveness and the rhetoric that's there. But we are seeing this take a new turn and a more severe turn that's getting more and more drastic, and we really do need to dial it back to get some cooler heads in play.
I agree. And people, this is my belief, because some people will go, "Ooh, that guy's a radical." I'm not a radical. I've looked at what's happening. You know, I come from a third world country where I saw the same patterns, the same decisions, the same strategy used. So I'm not an idiot, but I'm not going to put my beliefs on somebody else. Karen, thank you for coming on Fired Up again. To everybody, to see this episode, any previous episodes, We're also releasing a slew of new podcasts. We got TNT, which deals with baseball, fantasy baseball. That's guys in Major League Sports, not men fantasizing about women, Karen, just to let you know.
I might be a political junkie, but I'm not an idiot when it comes to sports. And let's go
There you
Dodgers,
go,
I might
there you
add
go.
as well.
And we got our points on the board. Karen comes on here a lot. We've got you. We've got your handle. Go to sportsgrumblings.com to find these podcasts, to share them. And Karen, again, thank you. We're gonna have you on probably within the next couple of weeks, because what I'm gonna do is look at some of these closer races, and what fascinates me are the R versus R, the D versus D, and maybe looking more deeply into that, the attorney general and the controller races, to see if there's a way we can find a silver lining and a potential strategy. Not that they'll follow it, but that's what makes all this fun. Karen, thank you for
Definitely.
coming on. And we
William,
will see
thank you so
next
much for having me. An absolute pleasure. Always good to be politically fired up on the show. So and to see the fired up passion as well. So thank you very, very much for having me.
And America, until next time, good night.
Good night.